trigonometric ratios. And I'm just going to start by asking you guys some questions. And in asking you these questions, we'll learn without really understanding what we're learning, and then I'll get into the explanation of what we just learned. But I'm kind of giving you the big picture right here. So right now, all I want you to do is answer the following question. How can I find the hypotenuse of this right triangle? So we found that the length of the hypotenuse is 10 using the Pythagorean theorem. Now, I'd like for you to look at the angle that says 30 degrees and tell me the length of the side that's opposite the 30-degree angle. That is 8, right. So if I look at the side that's opposite 30 degrees, that's 8. Okay? Now I want you to tell me what's the length of the side that's adjacent to 30 degrees. 6. The length of the side that's adjacent to 30 degrees, it's not the hypotenuse, it's 6. What's the length of the hypotenuse? 10 is the length of the hypotenuse. So I could say that 8 is the side opposite 30 degrees. I could say that 6 is the side adjacent to 30 degrees. And I could say that 10 is the hypotenuse. So now let's look at the 60-degree angle. Who can tell me the side opposite of 60 degrees? What is the length of the side opposite 60 degrees? Yes, 6. Who can tell me the length of the side that's adjacent to 60 degrees but is not the hypotenuse? Austin, 8. And who can tell me what the hypotenuse is, which is always the hypotenuse regardless of which angle you're looking at?
10.
10, that's right. Now I'm going to ask you to write some ratios. And remember, ratios are just fractions, right? It's just comparing two numbers together, and we're going to write it in the form of a fraction. So if I said, let's look at our 30-degree angle. And I said, for our 30-degree angle, I want you to write for me the ratio of the side opposite to the 30-degree angle on top of the hypotenuse of the right triangle. And remember, again, this is only for right triangles. Can anybody tell me what that ratio would be? Anjan?
8 over 10.
8 over 10. And Anjan, can you simplify that fraction for me?
4 over 5.
Right, 4 over 5. Excellent. So again, looking at this 30-degree angle, could somebody tell me the ratio for the length of the adjacent side over the length of the hypotenuse? Tell me that as a ratio.
6 over 10.
Right. 6 is adjacent to the 30-degree side, and the hypotenuse is 10. Rebecca, what does that equal? 3/5. Good. And then could somebody tell me the ratio of the side opposite of 30 degrees over the side adjacent to 30 degrees? Ken? 8, 6. Good. And what is that simplified to equal?
4/3.
And you leave it improper if it's an improper fraction. You don't change it to the next number. Okay? So now we can switch this around and talk about the 60-degree angle. So for 60 degrees, somebody tell me, we're actually going to do the same kinds of ratios. So we're going to do opposite over hypotenuse. Somebody tell me what the fraction would be for the length of the side opposite 60 degrees over the hypotenuse. Anjan?
6 over 10.
Very good. So 6 is opposite 60 degrees, and 10 is our hypotenuse. And what does that equal? 3/5. Did somebody tell me for the 60-degree angle what the adjacent side is over the hypotenuse when you're looking at that angle? Right. So adjacent over hypotenuse hypotenuse equals 8 over 10. Josh, what does that simplify to? 4/5. And then we're going to do, once again, for 60 degrees, we're going to look at the opposite side, the length of the side opposite 60 degrees over the length of the side that is adjacent to 60 degrees. You got to give me that fraction. Okay? 6 over 8. And what does that simplify to equal? Good. Okay. Now, I'm going to give each of these a name. Whenever you're working with the opposite over the hypotenuse of a particular angle, that's referred to as sine. And we abbreviate it as sin. That's sine, and this is sine. So what sine means is opposite over hypotenuse. I'll explain this in more detail in a minute, okay? When we talk about the adjacent side over that hypotenuse, we give that a name, and that's called cosine, and we abbreviate it COS. So for both of these were our cosine of 30 degrees and cosine of 60 degrees. So cosine just means adjacent over hypotenuse for whatever angle you're referring to. So instead of saying adjacent over hypotenuse, we say cosine. Okay, it's just a short way of saying that. And then when we talk about opposite over adjacent, that's called tangent, and it's abbreviated TAN. And tangent is going to mean the opposite over the adjacent for whatever angle you're referring to. So that brings us to the next slide, which shows you the trigonometric ratios. If you have a right triangle, you know the following ratios. Sine equals the opposite side of whatever angle you're talking about over the hypotenuse. So if you're looking at angle A here, opposite is side A. And the hypotenuse is C, as we all always know. If you're talking about cosine, you're talking about the adjacent side over the hypotenuse. So if you're talking about angle A, the adjacent side is the leg is C over the hypotenuse C. And if you're talking about tangent, you're talking about the side opposite over the side adjacent. All right, so if we look at this slide, we can see what I just talked about in a little more detail. If you're looking at angle A, the side opposite A is the little a, is our leg A, and the hypotenuse is always C. If we look at cosine of angle A, the side opposite or adjacent to A is the leg that we're calling B in this case, and the hypotenuse is always C. And if we're looking at tangent of A, that's opposite over adjacent, and opposite of A is little a, and adjacent to A is little b, so you get the ratio A over B. And then if you look at angle B, it's the same ratios, but you opposite over hypotenuse, adjacent over hypotenuse, and opposite over adjacent, but you get different letters because you're referring to a different angle. And so there's a little saying that you can use to memorize what sine, cosine, and tangent are. So sine is opposite over hypotenuse. Opposite over hypotenuse. Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. And tangent is opposite over adjacent. So you can think of this as SOHCAHTOE, like soak your toe. SOHCAHTOE. Some people think of it as SOHCAHTOA. That's another way people have memorized it. I like SOHCAHTOE because with SOHCAHTOA, for me, I'll get confused because was that an A for sock? You know, was that an O? That's just me. So however, whatever you want to do to help you memorize it, but you do need to know sine means opposite over hypotenuse, cosine means adjacent over hypotenuse, tangent means opposite over adjacent, and it's relative to the angle that you're looking at.